Afternoon. Today we're starting a new stage, new period of development. What we're going to be looking at over the next 4 or 5 sessions together is looking at what your book refers to as early childhood. Many refer to it as the preschool years. And so what we're doing, what you want to do is to kind of create a mental image or a mental picture of children that are between the ages of 3 to 5 or, again, 3 years of age up until the time that they start kindergarten. So that's the age group here that we're focusing on. Like what we did with the birth to age 3, that period, what we did was look at physical development, we looked at cognitive development, and then we looked kind of at some combinations of social and emotional development, and likewise we'll do that with this stage. What we want to do today is to focus on, and we'll see how far we get, on physical development. A lot of this will be pretty much just kind of matter of fact, just some general information. What I've attempted to do pretty much with every stage is what I want to do is to kind of hit the high points, the things that are kind of the key characteristics of the developmental domains at the different stages. Again, as you read your textbook, in each domain it'll go into a lot more detail than what we'll cover in class. So, in terms of physical development, again, we're looking at issues around growth, and particularly looking at issues around motor development. We won't experience a lot of changes in sensory experiences at this stage. So both males and females, and again what you may want to do that's real helpful is to underline or highlight key terms, things that will help you remember the basic concepts. So here we're talking about both males and females grow a steady 2 to 3 inches in height and gain about 5 pounds in weight each year. Again, I typically wouldn't ask you to have to remember the number of inches or the pounds per year. I would think what's most important is just to remember is that we see fairly consistent growth from year to year during this period, and that it tends to be pretty consistent for both males and females. Again, remember there's always going to be individual variations. There'll be some who will gain less, some that'll gain more. You'll have some females that may outpace males in some situations, and vice versa. So there's a lot of individual variation. But then, again, on average, both males and females grow about a steady 2 to 3 inches in height, gain about 5 pounds in weight each year. And it doesn't mean that some children won't still experience growth spurts and stuff, but again, what we find is that over the course of the year, those are the changes that typically occur. Again, compared to infant and toddler, again, we did notice some changes after infancy with toddlers. What we find is children gradually lose their chubbiness and become thinner, kind of take on that more athletic look, particularly as the body proportions change. What we find is the legs tend to grow faster than the rest of the body. But again, we tend to get that leaner, thinner appearance. Again, not important that I think you necessarily write down all the words as much as write down the essence or the meaning of the statements. Body fat shows a steady decline and muscular growth progresses, making children stronger. If you are working with a group of young children this age, what would be significant about that statement? What would be significant to a teacher working with a group of young preschoolers? Because this is something that the children aren't cognitively necessarily aware of, but it is part of what's happening. Kids clearly are becoming stronger in terms of their legs and their arms. Any thoughts? One of the things that can happen is, and again, being gender stereotyped for a second only because we see that behavior more frequently, is particularly with young males. They tend to get involved in a good bit of kind of what we call rough and tumble or rough housing kind of play. And one of the things that would be important for, again, a teacher to be aware of is that it is possible for kids to do what? Unintentionally. Possibly to hurt each other. They get to kind of pushing and shoving and don't realize that, again, as they're getting stronger, that push or shove has the potential to literally knock somebody over or actually to hurt them. And again, rarely is it ever in the intent to inflict pain or harm on another child. It's just the fact that they're not aware, indeed, that they really are getting stronger, and some of the same behaviors have the potential of, of causing, potentially hurting another child. I remember my son and I have always, from when he was really young, wrestled. And I'd be laying in bed watching TV, and he would sneak around the corner and then come run in the room and then jump on me. And it was kind of a game that we played, and we'd kind of wrestle around. And of course, when he was really, really young, it was pretty easy to control what was going on. But then it would become a challenge for him to try to be able to hold me down or pin me down or do something. And one of the places where he really demonstrated the greatest strength was in his legs. And I'll never forget, and again, he was probably about 4 years of age, and we were wrestling on the bed, and he had pulled his legs back, and then he just, and I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention, thinking about it, just extended them. And I mean, it just hit me right in the chest and literally almost knocked me completely off the bed. And I looked shocked, and of course he looked shocked when he saw that I was shocked, and he was in no way attempting to hurt me, and he was in no way aware of the strength in his legs, but he put quite a kick, as he extended his legs. And again, as he got older, he got stronger. Now, at 13, it's a whole different story, But again, a lot of times kids are not aware of their increasing strength, that there is something that others need to be aware of, and in some cases to monitor. Another positive change is cartilage turns to bone at a faster rate and bones become harder. Again, if you haven't had a lot of experience, have been around preschoolers, it's probably hard to have a visual image or picture. But what's important about this change as you think about the activity level of preschoolers? Anything significant about, you think, bones becoming harder? Less likely to hurt themselves. And they're also much more likely to be engaged in the kinds of behaviors where they could potentially get hurt, such as, be the preschooler. Yeah. Such as, you're exactly right. Again, outdoor play, jungle gyms, climbing on jungle gyms, again, the kinds of things where they have an inclination to jump, they love to jump off of things. But what do they have somewhat difficulty doing? And again, it's a good thing that bones are clearly getting harder. Catching themselves or judging the distance of how high they really are. Because they also have a tendency to almost believe that they're invincible. They can jump off of anything and there's no way they're going to get hurt. And sometimes they'll get up on some things that are pretty high. But again, particularly in outdoor kinds of play, they can get engaged in some activities that can cause some falls. And again, the harder bones make them a whole lot more durable. This is going to be true as a general rule, as we move again through the next stage of middle childhood and even into adolescence, is that gross and fine motor skills are going to progress rapidly. And again, gross motor skills are again referring to those large muscle groups. Again, lifting, running, climbing, those kinds of activities. Fine motor skills, again, involving the hands, the fingers. I think what's important to remember is gross motor skills always tend to be a little bit more developed as a general rule than fine motor skills, because they tend to be more involved in that muscle group. But again, fine motor skills are going to increase considerably during this stage because of the kinds of activities that they're involved in. But again, we still see gross motor skills somewhat more advanced. With this age group, we also find that balance, again, particularly thinking of the 2-year-old as they're starting to again progress from simply walking to running, what we find as they move into this preschool or early childhood years is that those skills continue to improve, particularly as they add the ability of improved balance, coordination, flexibility. Obviously they're running faster. They're stronger so they can lift more weight. It improves their ability to climb, particularly whether we're talking about trees or outdoor equipment, those kinds of things. But to give you an illustration of how skills evolve or develop is take something, for example, as running. Young kids love to run, particularly as they, again, begin to increase their level of balance. But when you think about younger kids than preschoolers, again, 2-year-old, typically what we think of is a 2-year-old pretty much running in a straight line. But one of the things that happens as we move into this early childhood years and as my balance coordination is improving, my running changes from simply the ability to run faster to run in a straight line, but I now can do what? And we see this in some of the play that they do, particularly outdoors, that involves running. Anyone know what a favorite outdoor running game that young children, preschoolers, love to play? Tag. Now, what does their improved skill help them do as you think about it in relationship to tag? You got to take yourself back to your childhood when you played tag. Zigzagging. Exactly. One of the things that when you're playing tag is what you've got to be able to do is to run fast, but not only run fast, but to be able to stop very quickly, or to be able to change directions very quickly. And if you watch preschoolers, it's kind of fun. They almost sometimes taunt one of the other kids. They'll run and then they'll stop, let the other kid almost, catch up with them, and then they'll dart to the left or dart to the right. Part of what's happening is their skills are improving, and now that they've added that ability of balance and coordination, they're able to do that. You also see this with one of the things we talked about. Kids love to jump off of stuff. The other thing kids like to do is to climb on things and to walk on things. They love to walk on walls. If you ever take a preschooler to the mall, what do they have a tendency to want to do you think? You have to kind of image the mall for a second. And the mall here in Springfield isn't quite as, doesn't have as much of it as other malls I've seen. But they have those little short walls, where they've built flower beds or something around, or where the ramps are going down. And kids love to hop up on those and walk across that little narrow walkway. Again, just simply demonstrating their improved balance and, and coordination. When I was walking with my son outside, he loved to get up on the little short sidewalks, or little short walls and walk along those. And I was waiting for him at any point in time to, to fall off. But again, improved balance, coordination. We do see some slight gender differences between boys and girls at this age. They're probably more of a reflection of the types of activities that they're allowed to be engaged in. And it's probably not as much of a gender issue, though I think what tends to happen is we tend to see young females oriented to certain activities more so than young boys and vice versa. And again, some of that's, that's changing. What we do find is that there's a slight advancement on the part of boys in terms of gross motor skills. And again, it's not uncommon for them to be involved, particularly, say, in sporting activities that, again, involve running, throwing, jumping to a certain extent. Again, if you think about basketball, baseball, football, soccer, those kinds of sporting events. And it's not that, again, that more and more girls aren't, partaking in those sport activities, but we traditionally have seen males more involved in those than females. Girls are slightly ahead in fine motor skills, and again, much more likely to be involved in what type of activities that would enhance the fine motor skills. And again, it doesn't mean that boys aren't as well, but what might they be somewhat more involved in? Again, particularly during the preschool years. And if you go into a classroom of preschool kids, you won't be surprised to see this to be somewhat true. Coloring, drawing, those kinds of activities that we often refer to them as craft things, but they're really not that, as much as the manipulation of other objects in terms of putting things together, working with small objects, gluing objects together, and we'll spend a lot more time with that. Boys tend to be involved in activities that tend to exhibit more of the gross muscle group as well. However, we will see that some females, in terms of gross motor, that involves balance. And again, not to be gender stereotype, but when we think of gymnastics, that involve, they're obviously gross motor skills, but also require a certain amount of balance and coordination and foot movement along with that balance. And I think of the balance beam and some of the other apparatuses. But females are more likely to be involved in gross motor activity that involves hopping and skipping. And again, you can think of some of the traditional games that, again, young girls might play. And again, it doesn't mean that boys don't, but we do tend to see still some gender differences there. There's no evidence that preschoolers exposed to formal lessons are ahead in motor development, except in the area of throwing. We do find that young kids tend to benefit from some formal instruction in the process of correctly throwing a ball. Now, it's not a statement against providing formal lessons and teaching young children correctly how to do certain gross motor activities or fine motor activities. But what we tend to find is that they simply provided the opportunity and the equipment that they need, that they will develop pretty naturally kind of, on their own. During this stage, we find an increased capacity of the respiratory and circulatory system. And again, if you've ever been around this age group, and particularly a group of children this age, you find this to be very true. And so what tends to happen is they have improved stamina, which simply means what? Last longer. They just seem to keep, every time I think of that statement, I think of the Energizer Bunny. They just keep going and going and going. And they want to keep going and going and going. But very much like the Energizer Bunny, what aren't they often aware of cognitively? How much energy they're actually expending, and what this age group tends to do is just to keep going kind of almost at full speed, and then what happens? Almost suddenly, they crash. Exactly. They just all of a sudden kind of hit this wall where they are extremely tired. What they have difficulty doing is realizing when they've hit that point. Any guesses on when you can tell they're reaching that point? We saw this in two major areas in my son growing up. And I've seen it in numerous other children as well. You can tell when they're starting to get tired. Fussy and irritable. And what's the other thing that will determine or influence them getting fussy and irritable? You can almost gauge it every time. If they get fussy and irritable, it means they're either tired or they're hungry. Once they get tired or hungry, we tend to see a change in behavior. And you'll see a really cooperative, easygoing kid, just doing fine, and then all of a sudden, it's like he or she kind of falls apart. And you can almost guess one of the two things is happening. They finally reached that, exhausted their energy, and they're now tired, and they need to replenish their energy from the need for rest, or they've gotten hungry. Now, why would a child, and children tend to get hungry, this age group tends to get hungry pretty frequently. Any guesses why? Part of it is definitely they're growing and they're using a lot of energy. And the other thing is that when they have an opportunity to eat, what do they tend to do? They don't eat, exactly, they don't eat a whole lot. It's probably a very bad analogy, but I think of the analogy of, and somewhat true today, at least if you're like me at all, you pull up to the gas pump, and do you fill up? Well, I don't always fill up because I'm not sure where the price is going, because they seem to drop almost daily. And if they're going down, I don't want to fill up yet, And then if they're going to go up, then I may put more in, And kids are kind of like that. They pull into that, not to the gas station literally, but into the food line, And do they fill up? No. They put in about $1 worth, which does what for them? It fills that craving that they have for food. Now, why don't they fill up? Wasting time, because I could be exploring, playing, having a good time, and sitting here eating isn't a good use of time. And so what tends to happen is they'll eat just enough to kind of satisfy their hunger, and then they're ready to get back to whatever it is they're doing. And then that's why you'll see with this age group frequently, and again, also they're exerting a lot of energy when they do, will then come back and say, well, I'm hungry. And you're thinking, well, you just ate, which is true. But they ate just enough to kind of curb that appetite, and they're ready to get going again. And likewise, again, with that increased kind of stamina, they're going, they're going strong, and then what they often don't realize is they actually are getting tired, and there's a need for rest. And then you'll see it. They'll start to kind of get fussy. They'll start to get irritable, which is a sign they need rest. If you wait too long, then they'll have a complete meltdown, kind of thing. What we find is that the children still need adequate rest at this age group. And most, and again, there are clearly exceptions, and I've heard parents, constantly say, well, my child quit taking a nap during the preschool years, and it didn't seem to create any problem. But I think what we find is that most children benefit from a nap up until about the age of 5 when they get ready to start kindergarten. And literally what the nap does is it helps replenish their energy level. And I've seen it over and over again. I've seen kids who have gone and gone and gone. They started to get, irritable, kind of fussy. Again, if they develop a regular, consistent pattern of naps about the time when they start to run out of energy, from the nap they wake up and they're totally a different kid again. They're ready to go, they're happy, they're excited, and full of energy. I've also watched where, adults have changed their patterns and they skip that afternoon, nap time, and the kid may kind of fight their way through it, but what tends to happen as the day wears long? They may fall asleep later on, late in the afternoon or early in the evening, so then you have a child who now has fallen asleep at 5 o'clock. So they've caught an hour or two, and now what? They're not ready for bed. They're ready to play again. They have been rejuvenated, and they're ready to go, and then try to get them bed at what would have been maybe their normal, bedtime, and it's a battle. It's a battle to be won. It's amazing that with this age group, if you're able to establish and maintain fairly consistent routines, they do a whole lot better, and they're a whole lot easier to relate to. So again, most, and again there clearly are exceptions, but most do benefit from a nap. They do have trouble until they get into a routine or into a pattern. And this is true for naps. It also can be true for a lot of kids in terms of nighttime sleep, is they have trouble stopping. And a lot of that just simply stems from the fact that stopping and sleeping to them seems like what? You got to be the child. What does stopping and taking a nap feel like to the child? And that's why many tend to resist it. Wasted time. I could be doing so much more important things with my time than laying here and taking a nap. Cognitively they have trouble really realizing or understanding the importance of that nap. Now, once they develop patterns and routines, many children will settle into that pretty naturally. I know we worked really hard, even when we were out of town and when we changed our regular routine, that we still worked really hard at maintaining a regular nap routine, because it made the evening time so much easier, as well. But again, they may have trouble, but once they develop those patterns, they'll settle into that and really adjust pretty well. They tend to sleep at this period fairly deeply at night, particularly compared to later in life. I had mentioned before that my son, and again, a lot of parents really struggle with sleep, developing sleep patterns and routines. And so what we found when we hit the preschool years was actually the period of time when he really began to sleep through the night. And he slept very soundly and rarely ever woke up. At the beginning of his life, we had lots of difficulty with sleep issues. At first, we really weren't aware of what was going on. He had a lot of trouble calming himself down, falling asleep. I used to have to walk him for long periods of time. He would kind of cry for long periods of time. And what we discovered was either one of two things. It could have been colic, and a number of children experience colic at a very young age. But my wife has chronic asthma. And one of the things that, and again, I don't know if anyone in here has asthma or have ever dealt with asthma, but a lot of the medications that you take for asthma is intended, again, to increase your ability to breathe, but it also has the effect of hyping you up, and it makes you more difficult calming down. And so my wife initially began to breastfeed. And we weren't really sure whether that would have any effect or not. But what we came to discover is that the breastfeeding was actually putting into his system, we believe, now we don't know for sure if that was the case, the asthma medicine. And so he would just get hyped up, and he was having trouble calming himself down. And when we finally came to that realization, and then quit breastfeeding and moved to the bottle, within a couple of weeks he was a totally different kid. You know, he was able to calm down, beginning to sleep. And there was a period of time he was still he was still a toddler, 2 years of age. And part of when he was 3 years of age, we lived in a neighborhood, and we never realized it at the time, the impact of something like that. We were living, housing was provided for us because of my wife's employment. And so we weren't able to choose at that point the house we lived in. And so this particular place we were living was in a neighborhood, the house set on the corner of two major streets. One street ran to the hospital, the other one ran to the police department. And the one street had no stop signs. And it ran to Main Street. And so cars frequently speeded down that street. And it was both of them were busy roads. And our house sat right on the corner of that. And every night you heard sirens, because it was the route that ambulances took to get to the hospital. And it was close to the police department, so again you would hear other sirens for different purposes. It was also not an overly safe neighborhood. It was a loud neighborhood, and it wasn't uncommon to hear gunshots. So anyway, long story short, after a period of time, we were able to relocate. After about the second attempt to break in, they decided maybe it wasn't a safe place for us to be, and so they bought a house out in one of the suburb areas. It was not a gated neighborhood, but it was just one entrance into the neighborhood, you know, and I remember how quiet the neighborhood was. And literally that night, the first night we lived in that house was the first night he slept all the way through. And all of a sudden we began to put pieces together and realized is that he was terribly affected and distracted by the loud noises. Was part of what was going on, and again he was still relatively young. And from that point on, apart from him being, you know, and again he would have been about 4 years of age at this point, from that point on he slept through the night, rarely ever woke up unless he was sick, and slept real solidly, and still maintains that pattern pretty much today. So again, you know, kids do tend to sleep, generally speaking, pretty much through the night. The average total sleep begins to decline somewhat from the previous stages. But again, young children can have some difficulty getting to sleep, wanting to go to sleep. But if parents, you know, will develop routines and patterns for that, they will fall into those patterns and adjust pretty well. But again, it's important to have patterns and consistency with that. Two terms that's important to be aware of that often some children will exhibit either both of these or one of these more frequently. But I think it's important for you to be aware of, again, if you happen to be, obviously when you become parents it may be an important issue, or if you ever happen to work with young children or work with parents of young children, it would be beneficial, or have any contact with families at all, because these may come up. Now, nightmares are fairly easy. Most people are familiar with what they are, which is nothing more than a bad dream. You know, and what will happen with a nightmare is the child will typically wake up. They may scream, they may cry. One of the distinguishing factors with a nightmare is they do wake up. And what are they able to do as a result of waking up in most cases? Calm down. And they can also probably tell you what happened. They can give you a little bit of information about what the nightmare was about. But they're awake, they're alert, you can talk to them, they'll respond to you, they'll calm back down and then typically go back to sleep. But in the morning they very well will remember that indeed they had a bad dream and what the bad dream was about. And it may be related to something they had seen on TV, you know, or something that had happened during the day that may have triggered that. But again, it's nothing more than a bad dream. And we've all had, you know, those kinds of dreams or experiences. Maybe not a nightmare or a bad dream, but an experience during that dream state that caused us to wake up. And again, we have we can recognize what it was, remember what the experience was about. Now, it's important to understand that, again, a nightmare is very different from a night terror. And what tends to happen, and it was my experience the first time my child had a night terror, because the beginning is very similar to a nightmare. And the beginning would simply be what? Child's in their bed, You're asleep, and what occurs? Any guesses? Be very similar to a nightmare, and from your room you would not be able to distinguish the difference. Screaming or crying. And so you immediately go into the room, and your first assumption is bad dream, nightmare. And your first instinct is to? Huh? Exactly, to wake them up if they don't appear to be awake. Now, anyone happen to know the difference between night terror and nightmare? You're not. One of the big differences is you are not awake. In fact, it's probably recommended on the part of the adult to not wake them up or attempt to wake them up. They will scream, they will cry, and they may even verbalize. And there are some instances where they actually may have their eyes open and still not be awake. You know, what will happen, do you think, if you attempt to wake them up? And it's why it's largely not recommended. They will actually become very physically agitated. Again, remember, they're not awake. And as if you begin to shake them, you know, in any kind of way, they will begin to swing their arms and their legs, and they'll do that pretty violently. And again, remember, they're not awake for the most part. You know, if you force them awake, you can create a great deal of internal confusion, you know, and frustration on their part. In most cases, the best thing to do is just simply, if you'll talk to them, they will calm back down relatively quickly. And you can give them some light kind of touch, but again, you don't want to try to force them, you know, awake. You just talk to them, kind of pat, physically touch, but very lightly, very calmly. And in most cases, they'll calm right back down. And they haven't really, for the most part, woken up. They'll just simply calm down and will continue sleeping. Now, the biggest difference in the morning, what will be different in the morning with a night terror versus a nightmare? They won't remember it at all. You'll say, "What was the matter last night? You woke up screaming." And they'll look at you as if you're crazy, because they will have no recollection at all of what occurred. I had a student a number of years ago was sharing her experience as a child going through night terrors, and had an adult that didn't understand what was going on, and literally threw water in her face trying to wake her up, you know, which created a lot more trauma for her, not realizing the difference again between the night terror and the nightmare. Again, nightmare, bad dream, remember it, you know, both when, and again, wakes up, will remember the events, will have some reference of what occurred the next morning. Night terror, again, typically doesn't wake up unaware of what's going on. In the morning, typically doesn't remember anything. Two different experiences. Both can be experienced by children. More common nightmares probably than night terrors, but it's important to be able to recognize the difference, because our response should be different as well. Sure.
So it would be a night terror until they wake up. When they wake up, it becomes a nightmare, or are they?
They're typically with a night terror, unless you force them awake, they often won't wake up. A nightmare, when they start crying and screaming, they're awake. You go into the room and they're awake, you know, and they're aware of it, you know. A night terror, they're much more, if anything else, almost kind of in a daze. You know, like I said, I remember the first time it occurred, and again, eyes open or closed doesn't matter. They're just really not awake. And again, they may not even be sitting up. They may be talking irrationally or crying or screaming. And the difference is, if they're not, you know, consciously awake and talking about the experience in a way that they're responding to you, it's more likely that night terror. And then it's just a matter really of just talking to them and seeing if they'll calm down. And again, the difference is you'll be aware if they're awake or not. And it's at that point you really don't want to force them awake. Just talk, kind of calm them down. And sometimes it's just hard to know the difference. Like I said, the first time I didn't realize what was going on. I realized it real quickly, because when I attempted to wake him up, he began to move and begin to swing his arms, and then I knew exactly what was going on, and then I very quickly changed my approach to what was happening. And again, calmed right back down, went, you know, continued sleeping, and that was the end of it. Never occurred that night. And we probably had, you know, maybe 4 or 5 episodes over the, you know, the period of his, you know, of his early childhood years. Still periodically, with most children, still every once in a while have a bad dream or a nightmare, but not very often, really. We find a normal decline in appetite, and again, overall appetite. Some of that may be due to the change in growth rate. I think one of the things that's important at this stage is to understand that eating habits become established very early in life. And that many of these patterns that will actually be started during the preschool years will continue right on up into our adult years as well. This age group is often very picky eaters. And there will be variations in the amount of food that they eat. There'll be periods of time when they'll eat a lot of food, and there'll be other times when they'll hardly eat anything. And again, you'll wonder if something's wrong, if there's something that might be unhealthy for them. And I think the general rule is if we provide healthy, nutritious meals, the kids internally will monitor the amount of food they need to eat on their own, and will do that pretty correctly. And sometimes that's kind of scary, because I remember going through periods of time, again, when Matthew hardly ate anything. And was really worried that he was sick or something was wrong. And then just almost like overnight, there would be periods of time when you couldn't hardly fill him up. He just seemed to eat everything. That's not true. Not everything. A lot of only certain things. And I don't know, you probably don't remember. Your parents may be able to kind of fill you in on some of that. But it's really not uncommon for this age group to only be willing to eat certain foods. Now, again, we may provide a lot of foods. Families have different preferences for how they encourage the eating of certain types of foods. But my wife and I were reflecting this morning, at this stage, you could almost macaroni and cheese and hot dogs. I don't know and cheese pizza and French fries. That was it. And I was convinced that he was going to grow up as an adult. He still loves macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, but he has expanded his food choices. And meat, he wouldn't eat meat at this age for nothing. No, you put any kind of hamburger or pepperoni or anything on that pizza, he was pulling it off. Cheese pizza only. But he would eat macaroni and cheese all 3 meals if he could, with hot dogs along with it. And like I said, he would not touch anything else, no matter what you provided, for the longest time. And then gradually, that began to change. But again, not only picky eaters, but particular patterns get established, and sometimes patterns that are hard to break. One of the things is that I know as a child growing up, and it's still true today, not healthy, just unfortunately true, is I don't like vegetables. I'm sure my mom attempted or tried to feed me vegetables, but I just didn't like vegetables. I was an adult before I think I ever ate a salad. And I only ate a salad because I was traveling and eating out. And when you bought, meals in restaurants, typically a salad came with your meal, and I didn't, I was taught not to waste food. So I started eating salads, But I didn't grow up liking vegetables, and to this day, I don't like a lot of vegetables. Peas, green beans, corn, that's about the extent of it. All that other stuff that people just love, okra and peppers and stuff, I find just asparagus, you name it, I find it nauseating, But again, I developed that pattern, really early in life. And I don't know if you can remember, but one of the things that we often don't realize is the patterns we establish really early on stay with us. And it's also, I think, important to remember that I said that, for the most part, children have pretty good internal mechanisms for monitoring the amount of food at different times, particularly preschoolers. But I remember growing up that one of the messages that I was sent pretty strong is that when food is put on your plate, what are you supposed to do with it? This is the message that I heard. Eat it all. Is that old adage, an empty plate is a happy plate? I literally got, I think, at different times the message every once in a while, and I'm sure none of you did, but the starving children in China, you don't waste food. And so, literally, that was the message that I carry into adulthood, is that, you eat what's on your plate. Now, I only would put certain things on my plate, of which most of the time it was not vegetables. And I grew up loving meat and potatoes, bread and butter. I still love that to the day. And I find it's funny, I still carry some of those same patterns and messages. And the other message that I received really strongly was, thrifty. Get the most, out of the value of your dollar. Well, the worst thing for me in my life at this point are buffets. Because there's kind of what I call 2 rules of buffets. If you go to a buffet, you've got to go through twice. Because if you only go through the buffet line once, you basically probably got what you would have gotten if you just simply had ordered a meal for the most part. So you got to go through twice. I mean, that's not a written rule. It's just probably the rule that somewhere I adopted. However, the other rule is if you go through the line twice, you still must clean your plate. And so I find a lot of times as an adult, I probably eat twice as much food as I probably need to eat, But it's hard to get out of your head sometimes those tapes that say, eat what you put on your plate. I think one of the things that happens a lot of times is that adults will a lot of times put more food on a young child's plate than what they need or desire, but then are encouraged again, like I was as a kid growing up, to finish your plate. Does anyone happen to remember any other patterns around eating that maybe was instilled in you growing up as a child that you still somewhat carry over today? And they may be healthy as well as unhealthy. I know in some households, that it's expected that you will take at least a bite of every food item that's there. And you may sit there a long time until you at least try it. Other households, it's not quite that expectation. Anyone remember any patterns in their household that maybe you carry through to this day, or patterns that were established? Okay, drinking a glass of milk every day. Do you still, as an adult, still drink a glass of milk? All right. Anyone else?
Mine wasn't really like in my family. It was my extended family.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt used to come and visit a lot, and she would always yell at my brother and I for not eating all of our food. So she made us start at the top and then eat everything, like eat all of this, then eat all of that. And I still to this day eat in a clockwise pattern. Like,
Interesting.
I can't move on to anything else until I eat the first one. It's
Okay.
kind of weird.
And you're not alone. There are a number of people I know who eat in either a clockwise pattern or my son is that way. He will, and I find it humorous, because it's just different. He eats one item at a time. You watch me, I eat it all, kind of simultaneously. I'll even mix it all together. He will not allow foods to touch.
They can't touch, and if they touch, then I can't eat.
You can't eat it, exactly. And again, it's interesting. It's just a pattern that gets established. And it's not a good or bad pattern. It's just a pattern that gets established. But it's interesting how those patterns will continue right on into adult life. And I'm sure, as he gets older, foods won't touch. And he looks at me, and he's just as humored. How in the world can you eat that stuff when you mix it all together? And I figure it's all going to the same place, so what difference does it make? Again, different patterns. Anyone else think of a pattern or some aspect of eating that was kind of emphasized in your house growing up? There are certain households that I know of that won't allow certain foods, a lot of times what we refer to as junk foods or sweets, only at certain times and only can eat healthy or snack foods. Others almost maybe to the opposite extreme. Sometimes there's limitation to whether you can drink soft drinks or not. Some of those kinds of things. Again, patterns early on, but we really do carry those patterns, well into our adulthood.
Like everything in my house isn't necessarily pattern of how I eat, but everything in my house was diet or light or stuff like that. And so like now I would never buy something that wasn't like not on purpose, just because that's what I grew up with. My dad always buy off-brand, so I always buy off-brand.
Really? Yeah.
That's just what I grew up with.
Again, learn patterns of whether you eat light foods, diet foods, again off-brand foods, and again, when you grow up and those patterns are established, you don't even think about it. You just do it. Now, maybe at some point in time you may try a non-off-brand and think, gosh, that's actually better and may change, but there's not necessarily a natural inclination, to do that. And so you just again maintain those kinds of continual patterns. I have even known some who eat dessert first. I actually think it's not a bad philosophy, not a healthy one, but who'll eat desserts first and then the rest of the meal later on. So anyway, different patterns, they get established early on, and I think probably the message is, or the important message is obviously what we really want to try to do, which what we've tried to do is to really establish healthy patterns early on, which means we've had to break some of our unhealthy patterns of the past, so that we can establish maybe healthier patterns for our child than maybe we did, growing up. I think the other thing that's important to be aware of, and again, this is an issue as a society now, but we used to rarely ever be concerned about the issue of obesity and overweightness, particularly in preschoolers. Now it's increasingly becoming a health concern even during this period. And what we're finding is far too many children really, and again, I'm not talking about the majority at all, but just simply an increasing number of children, at this stage of life are considerably overweight. And what we find, and we'll see this when we get to the middle childhood years, is that, again, developing particularly unhealthy patterns, and again, those unhealthy patterns that can contribute to overweightness will and can carry over in many instances into adulthood. And what we find is overweight children are more likely to become overweight adults. And a lot of that's because of, again, unhealthy patterns that got established very early. And like I said, now early as the preschool years, that was not near the concern it was, 30 years ago. So again, some changes and issues around appetite. Significant, I think, to children, probably not a major life issue, is at the beginning of this period, children usually have all their baby teeth. And then by the end of this period, they begin to lose them, replacing them with permanent teeth. And we'll talk some about the significance of that when we get to, to the middle childhood years. All right, we got a couple of other things underneath physical development that we will finish up next time. And then we'll move on and begin to look at cognitive development. Again, when we look at cognitive development, we're looking again at Piaget's theory and looking at, again, that second stage, which will cover most of the preschool years.